Welcome to Still Creative. My name is Eric Averett, and I had a chance to talk with Shelly Towns, Chief Marketing Officer at Marathon Health. Shelly has earned an Indianapolis Business Journal Women of Influence Award and has served on several boards, including the United Way, TechPoint, and the Indy Chamber. On a personal note, Shelly is married and has two daughters. Our conversation included one of my favorite topics, which is building high performance teams. Enjoy. All right. Well, Shelly, thank you very much for joining me.
Of course. Thanks for the ask.
Can you tell me a little bit about yourself in terms of creativity in general, and then specifically how you can apply creativity in your chief marketing officer role?
Yeah, sure. It's funny. I would say that for the most of my career, I would have considered myself a creative first. And when I think back to starting out and some of those individual contributor roles, my first job was a writer, which I definitely put in the creative category. And I wrote professionally for probably like 7 years or something, and then really found the business side of the startup I was at the time, which was Angie's List, um, and was able to, it was kind of an easy transition to parlay the writing skills into more of a marketing role. And as I moved into marketing and kind of got more and more responsibility over the years, which was really fun, I kind of felt maybe a little bit of a leveling out of some of the creativity for a while, because there was a lot of analytics that went into the role, and trying to find that sweet spot of creative while also, strategy and driving accountability and building teams and all of these things that go with that. I remember at one point we did these 360 reviews, and I got some feedback from a peer at the time to say, "Hey, I wish you were more creative," which was just almost shocking to me to read in writing that that somebody who I certainly respected and had been working with for a couple of years did not see me as a creative, because I always would have self-identified that way. But I found myself probably overcompensating on more of the analytical stuff, and I guess just doing things that maybe didn't naturally lend themselves to what people think of as creative. And I remember that moment thinking, that's not me. That's not how I want to show up. And so I just felt like I've been very intentional about um, finding that balance and making sure that I am applying my creativity. I think it's important for me for my mental health and my natural strengths of who I am. It's where my head goes. And so making sure that I was showing up, I guess, a little more authentically, because I do think creativity is so important, regardless of your function, I guess.
That's excellent. I can certainly relate to that element of mental health and doing something creative and the good place that puts me in. The other thing that we talk a lot about on Still Creative is that this element of creativity and hard work and ultimately positive outcomes in organizations. So
And, honestly, I think so much of leadership is storytelling. Being able to kind of cast a vision for a reality that doesn't exist yet, and getting people excited to follow, to get behind that vision, to want to achieve the vision together. And storytelling is very creative, and that's definitely a skill that I think I'm good at. I try to be good at and to improve. How do you say things in a way that get people excited? And I think too, part of my background is a product management function, and a big thing of product design and product development is make something as real as possible, as fast as possible. It can't just be a conversation. How do you put it on a whiteboard or a screen, just to give people the idea of like, oh, that's what it is. Yes, that's awesome. I want to do that. And so how do you do that at scale with maybe, teams of 5, 10, hundreds, thousands of people, and especially now when people aren't under the same roof and we're very distributed. I think that storytelling and that narrative is even more important. And so finding an outlet for that has been really helpful for me, and just trying to hone those skills.
can you talk a little bit about your own experience with feedback and your thoughts related to giving feedback as a leader of a team, feedback in an effective, productive way?
I can remember one of the first things too, and I think you have to remember for myself, like I'm a marketer at heart, and marketing is all about, promotion and how do we tell these great stories and kind of tell about all these great things that we do. And I remember one of my first opportunities, I became a direct report to our CEO. And this was at Angie's List. And I started to report to Bill Osterly directly. And I remember getting ready for that first meeting, and I knew Bill. I'd worked for him in a different capacity for a while, but reporting to him was different. And I remember thinking like, okay, I'm going to go in here, and I've got this agenda. I've got some dedicated time with him. What do I want to talk about? And my first thought was, I'm going to go tell him about all these things that are going well. And I remember talking to a friend of mine at the time who had been reporting to him for a while, and he said, no, you need to go in there and tell him what's not going well, which like violated everything that I thought as a marketer, like, what, the baby's not ugly. And it was such a light bulb moment for me in terms of how do you get comfortable when saying things aren't going well and asking for help and suggesting something that maybe you're not sure how to solve, or, I felt like that might be a sign of weakness. And so that was a really big aha moment for me. And it was great feedback that I continue to think about today. Being very comfortable giving quote unquote bad news. And I think too, if it's not a surprise, that's a different kind of bad news. But like I tell my teams all the time, we do red, yellow, greens kind of status updates. And, red is not a sign of weakness. Red is a sign of professional maturity. Like I know enough to know that this isn't going well. We're off track, but here's what we're going to do to get it off track. That's great feedback. And so I'm trying to create a team environment where people feel safe to ask for help, to say something's not going well, to say, I don't know how to solve this problem, and that we can figure it out together. And so I think being able to both hear feedback thoughtfully, and I will tell you that it's always a work in progress. I tend to get defensive. I always am working on that, but being able to take feedback and being able to give feedback in a way that makes people feel heard and that you care about them. I think some of the best feedback I've been given is, the one I mentioned of, be willing and able to say what's not going well. That was a really good one for me. The other one was Debbie Rout, who serves as our chief people experience officer at Marathon Health and has become a good friend of mine and a mentor, just said, you can be intentional without being intense. I try to be sometimes I try to be efficient to a fault. Skirt the small talk. Let's just get right to it. And that's not always the best way to build relationships and to build trust. And so I always want to be thoughtful. I think I hate the idea of kind of wasting time. And I think, so I've worked very hard to try to find a balance where I can be intentional, but I don't have to scare people in the process. And so that was another just really good one for me that I often reflect on and think about. And I think, this idea of just performance feedback. I heard something just recently, actually. It was like the goal of feedback isn't to make somebody feel good, it's to make their work better. Now that's not an excuse to not be thoughtful or humane and in the way empathetic in the way that you give that feedback. But I thought that was a really nice distinction. And I think high performers, great talent, expect constructive feedback. And so getting comfortable with providing that, I feel that that's a responsibility.
That's one of the things that I've learned from just talking with you and thinking about my own approach to business, and that idea of thinking about you can be intentional without being intense. And I always want to be very efficient. But for me, perhaps that is too much of what my focus is. And so thanks for passing along that lesson learned.
Well, thanks to Debbie. She's the one that planted that seed. And it was a great call out too.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So thank you for the time that you've shared and the energy you put into being a leader. Really stands out for me, and your ability to apply the creativity that you have. And so glad we had a chance to talk. Thank you, Shelly, for joining me.
Thanks, Eric. This was fun, and it's always fun to talk and to reflect on some of this stuff. So I appreciate the invite. Thanks so much.